Hi, my name is Mia. Welcome to Scrubs and Savings. I'm a 22-year-old new grad nurse documenting how I'm living intentionally, spending joyfully, and giving generously. And today I'm going to share exactly how I budget, save, and build wealth in my 20s to create a life that I love to live. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of my money management strategy, I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge your money feelings and your money mindset because it 100% affects the way you manage your money. Now, I know in a lot of personal finance content, budgeting is almost discussed like it's a financial diet. It's restrictive, you have to cut out everything that you enjoy, and some financial gurus kind of imply that you are a failure if you have difficulty sticking to a budget and just money management in general. And I really think that's not a very healthy way to view money. Now, the way that I think about budgeting is that it's really just a tool to help me plan out the life that I want to live. I'm able to figure out all of my fixed expenses, make sure that I'm achieving my financial goals, but also making sure that I'm spending money and spending my life doing the things that I love to do. And even though I've definitely worked on having a more abundant mindset when it comes to budgeting, I still have some things that I need to work on in regards to having a healthy money mindset. For example, even though I have a personal finance channel and I talk about money all the time, I sometimes feel selfish or greedy for wanting to make more money and wanting to build wealth for myself because I definitely don't want to become a Scrooge that hoards all of their wealth without spreading it to their community. And to fight that narrative, I try to remind myself that providing myself and my future family with financial security and freedom allows me to be even more generous because I know that all of my needs and wants can be covered and the rest can be used to improve my community. And I'm sure if you've been watching my channel for a while, you may have noticed that I sometimes feel guilty whenever I make purchases on more quote unquote frivolous things like clothing, makeup, and just even little knickknacks that I want to buy for my spaces. And I'm sure part of that mindset has come from watching so much personal finance content that looks down upon that type of spending. But I try to remind myself that because I'm able to meet my needs and my savings goals, I need to give myself permission to spend money on random things that I want to purchase. And I try to combat this even more in my budget. I set aside a certain amount of money for each of those spending categories to almost give myself permission to be like, hey, I have the money for this type of stuff that I want, and it's not taking away from all of the other things that I want to achieve with my money. So go ahead and spend it. And I think that's a little bit of a hidden gem for me when it comes to budgeting. I would call myself a saver. I don't particularly like binary labels for how you manage your finances, but most of the time I'm inclined to put away my money for the future instead of enjoying it right now. But again, just reminding myself that I'm able to achieve all of my financial goals, I can enjoy the money that I work so hard for. A lot of people's feelings and narratives about personal finance can come from how your family talked about money, if they even talked about money at all, and a lot of the content that we consume. And I think a great way to dip your toes into the personal finance world is just exploring how you feel about money, how your parents talked about money, and analyzing how you approach your finance because of that. And of course, everyone's money mindsets, feelings, narratives are different. We all have different upbringings, and that really affects how we view finances. I know that in my family, we talk about finances pretty openly. My parents always talked about the importance of saving, but also working hard and playing hard. And I'm sure you can see how that impacts the way that I view my money because I tend to see it as something more positive rather than negative. And there's a lot of money narratives out there, but some of them can look like wanting to avoid thinking about personal finances, that money is the root of all evil, we should not covet money, or that we have to save every dollar that we earn, because you never know what can happen to you. And I'm sure there's many more out there, but I think it's really important to face these money narratives head on and think about where you would like to be in regards to your mindset about money. Now, let's get into the practical side of how I budget my money. I use a zero based budgeting system in which all of the money that I have and whenever I earn new money is assigned a job in my budget. And a job can look like something as big as an emergency fund and something small like purchasing myself a new pair of work shoes. So, to really implement this, I use the budgeting software You Need a Budget. So, as you can see on the screen, this is my actual budget in YNAB, and I have plenty of budget categories. And the way I assign my money is by going through my fixed monthly expenses, like my gym membership and my subscriptions. Then I assign money to my non monthly but expected expenses like car maintenance. My fun categories are next. And then I assign money to my financial goals like my moving out fund, my emergency fund, travel, and a wedding fund. And I'm just going to show you guys a quick example of what I do when I get new money coming into my accounts, which normally comes in the form of my W-2 paychecks. So since I'm a month ahead, I know all of my expenses for August are fully funded. I use my current month's paychecks to fund my next month categories. And I know that my monthly fixed expenses are funded, my non-monthly expenses are funded. I think all of my fund money is funded. So if this is how much my paycheck is, I would assign $317.21 to my emergency fund, $451.50 to my apartment fund, $250 to travel, and $200 to my wedding fund. And with this leftover money, I could fund some fun money categories, overfund a couple of my savings categories, or just start funding the following month. So for me, I kind of am passively saving up money for a down payment, but I also kind of want to give myself permission to spend money on some clothing soon because I know Black Friday is coming up. So I'm going to assign $8.99 to my clothing fund and then $10 to my down payment fund. And I'm going to redo all of this because that's not actual money that's currently in my accounts, but that is generally what it looks like when I'm budgeting my paychecks. And if you would like to see more of me doing that, I have a whole series called How I Budget My Paychecks, where I budget my actual paychecks. So even when I get a small amount of coming in, like high yield savings account interest, I still assign those dollars to specific jobs. I also keep track of my income and expenses in real time in my budget so that I know how much money I have for all of my budget categories. And my monthly budget isn't a set it and forget it type of thing until I track my expenses. I really try to be proactive whenever I'm spending money. So for me, that looks like checking in with my spending plan and seeing if I have enough money for a purchase that I want to make. So for example, I don't fund a coffee category, but I do sometimes get coffee out. So what that looks like for me is checking in with my plan whenever I want to purchase something. And if I have enough money in that category, I just think about the purchase for a little bit and go ahead and make it. But if I don't have enough money in that category, I can do one of two things. I can either move money from a different category to cover that expense, or just not make that purchase until I assign enough money for that category. So that allows me to be pretty flexible when it comes to my spending. Some months I want to spend more on dining out, so I'll move money from things that aren't as important to me that month, like activities or entertainment. So I just move money from those categories to my dining out category. And that way I can give myself permission to not quote unquote stick to my budget. I get to spend my money however I want as long as I have the cash to pay for it. So, since I've been tracking my money for the past 3.5 years, I'm very in tune with how much money I spend on each and every spending category, and that is how I come up with how much money that I want to set aside every month. So I basically just calculate my average spending, like for dining out, and just set aside enough money for that every month. And again, I can just move money from different categories if I want to spend more than that. And to make sure that my account balances on YNAB match what I actually have in all of my accounts, I will reconcile the balances on my banking websites and what I have in YNAB to make sure that my budget is true to what I actually have in my bank accounts. So I budget my paychecks every couple of weeks, and then at the end of every month, I take a look at my income for the month, my expenses, how much I saved, how much I invested, see if I'm making progress towards my financial goals, and really reflect on my spending every month to see if it aligns with how I want to spend. And then I look ahead to the next month and make any changes to my budget if need be. As for how I save my money without cutting out things that I enjoy, is making sure that I'm not spending more money than I actually make. So I think that's why budgeting is so important, because you can be aware of your income and your expenses and see what the difference between your income and expenses are, and then decide how you want to save and invest your money. And I know everyone says that, but it really is true. But to help me stay motivated with setting aside money rather than spending it now is that I have a very clear vision of how I want to save my money. And I think some people can feel a little resentful of the idea of saving money because it feels like we're taking money away from us now, which in part we are, but it'll allow you to save for more longer term goals. But I think a way to combat that feeling is by setting very specific and exciting savings goals for yourself. And by setting these specific goals, I have a very clear vision of what the money that I'm setting aside can do for me in the future. For example, I'm currently saving money to move out of my parents' house, and I'm not sure if you picked up while I was showing you my budget, but I have cute little budgeting names for all of my categories. So that apartment fund is called There's No Place Like Home. And whenever I'm setting aside money into that account, I can really picture what I'm working toward, which is finally becoming independent from my parents' help and creating a very cozy and comfortable space for myself and my partner, and really just make it feel like home for us. And then for each savings category, I set up a specific number of how much I want to save by a certain date. And I think something fun about YNAB is that whenever you put your actual goal, is that it'll calculate within the software how much I need. So by putting in that I want $5,000 saved to move out of my parents' house by April of 2026, it automatically calculated that I need to set aside $451.50 every month to achieve that goal in that amount of time. And I think a good way of making sure that you are setting aside money for your savings is actually treating savings like a bill that you have to set aside money for every month. And I think that's why I really advocate for having a specific number that you need to set aside for savings every month. So instead of thinking I'll save the money that I have left over every month, it just becomes something that you have to plan your spending around. Something that a lot of people do to kind of keep their savings out of sight, out of mind, and not be tempted to use savings money that flows into their checkings account is actually splitting up their direct deposit with their employer and sending the amount of money that they need to their savings goals from their paychecks. So you're not even seeing any of the saving money in your checking account. I don't personally do this because I get paid bi-weekly and I like having more flexibility with those extra paychecks. So instead, to make savings automatic for me, I've set up an automatic transfer from my Chase checking account to my Ally High Yield Savings account of $1,550 every month to make sure that all of that money that I want to save towards my goals will just go into my account without me having to think about it. And I can't believe I haven't talked about this sooner in this video, but I'm very aware that I'm in a very privileged situation where I currently have a well-paying job, but also have very little expenses because I'm currently staying with my parents, and I'm really trying to take advantage of this time to save up a lot of cash before I need to increase my expenses. And I would say the most exciting thing that I get to do with my money in my 20s is investing and building actual wealth. Because while saving gives me financial security and the opportunity to reach my short and medium savings goals, investing my money will give me more freedom in the future. Two of the main reasons why we work is just to cover our expenses right now and cover our expenses in the future once we stop working, also known as retirement. But by investing in my early 20s and quickly growing my investments to be able to cover my retirement expenses way before the traditional retirement age, it gives me a lot more options on how I want to work, because then I don't have to save as much for my retirement later on in my career. And like most other people, I really want to make decisions not based on what I can afford, but based on what I want to do. And even though I'm decreasing my spending power right now by investing so much of my money, I really want to take advantage of the most powerful tool that I currently have to build wealth, which is time. So, for example, if I started out with $0 in investments at 22, which is when I started working, if I invest $200 every month, if that money grows at an 8% rate of return, that money could be worth $1 million by the time I turn 67. But if I waited until I was 32 to start investing, I would have to set aside $450 to reach that same goal. And the power of that compound interest of my money earning more money and more money over time is exactly why I am throwing so much of my money towards my investments at this point in my life. And I know this can feel very overwhelming, and that's completely okay. But a little money invested today can go such a long way for you in the future. All things considered, though, my investment strategy is pretty simple in comparison to how much wealth I want to build. I make sure that I get my full employer match in my employer-sponsored retirement plan, which currently is a 403(b). So to achieve that at my current job, I have to invest at least 6% of my paycheck to get the full 3.5% match from my employer. I also make sure to max out my Roth IRA, which provides tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawal once I turn 59 and a half. I'm currently maxing this out by rolling over money from my 529 plan straight into my account. But once I reach that $35,000 limit, I'm going to start contributing to it again from my normal income. Since I currently live at home with my parents, I'm really trying to take advantage of this low expense time, like I said before. So I go above and beyond the 6% that I have to get the employer match in my 403(b). I'm currently contributing 40% of my paychecks to that account because I don't need that much money to cover my expenses and savings goals. Of course, once I move out of my house, I'm going to have to decrease that contribution, but I'm enjoying seeing how much that account is growing at this point in time. I also have a taxable brokerage account for my investments. However, I'm not currently contributing to those accounts because I want to take advantage of my tax advantage accounts first. And as for what I currently invest in, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just talking about how I manage my money, but I'm currently only contributing to index funds that track the total US stock market, total international stock market, as well as bonds. This allows me to have a lot of diversification, and I don't have to think about picking individual stocks for my investments, which is also a plus. And like my savings, my investments are automatic. So the money that comes from my paychecks automatically goes into my 403b. And I'm probably going to eventually split my direct deposits to move money straight into my Roth IRA when that time comes. And then as time goes on, I'm going to increase my investment contributions. And of course, the other way I'm trying to build wealth is through increasing my income. Since there's a limit to how many expenses that you can cut, but really no limit to how much money that you can earn. Of course, I can make more money by simply picking up shifts and working overtime and taking advantage of incentive pay while I can. However, for the sake of my mental health, I simply would rather not. So instead, the main way I want to increase my income is through my YouTube channel. Of course, I'm not making much money yet, but every little bit I earn makes a difference in my financial situation. And it's just kind of fun to see how much money I can make from making these videos that I make for fun in the first place. And what helps me stay motivated to build wealth is the opportunity to eventually decrease my workload, have more time and freedom to be generous, to travel, to spend time with my loved ones, and to pursue anything that makes me happy. That's basically it for how I budget, save, and build wealth in my 20s. And I really try not to come from a place of restriction or deprivation because, again, this is all about building a life that you want to live. And money is a way to help you do that. And for those of you who are just starting out on your financial journey or really in the nitty-gritty of paying off debt and building your emergency fund, I hope to remind you to start small, be kind to yourself, and remind yourself that you don't have to be perfect to make any financial progress. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, and I really hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.